Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, the recent inclusion of Fiji in the European Union Tax Haven Blacklist is actually very unfortunate. And it's actually demonstrative of the fact that the EU is trying to undermine development aspirations for small countries like ours in the guise of tax cooperation. And I'll explain why. Unfortunately, also, it would appear some of the members of the opposition, I understand maybe even the leader of opposition, join in the fray. Mr. Speaker, sir, the approach taken by the EU in this entire process has actually been completely non-transparent and in fact quite irresponsible. Many countries have spoken against this particular position of the EU. Usually, when you have global cooperation matters such as taxation through WTO, World Trade Organizations, all of these aspects are discussed openly in a transparent manner with clear guidelines and well-established processes. Proper consultation and assessments are undertaken, and implementation timelines take account of difference in countries' economic and financial circumstances. So with the WTO rules, opening up your markets, some countries had been given time. What has actually happened, Mr. Speaker, in this process of blacklisting countries, the EU Code of Conduct, business taxation, was very non-transparent. EU, instead of issuing a blanket synopsis or blanket information out, wrote directly to individual countries on measures or policy changes that need to be undertaken or otherwise get blacklisted. We were actually told that the EU Code of Conduct group generally wrote to smaller and weaker countries. This is obviously not fair. And I'll give you examples. We are not even sure what each country was asked to do and what guidelines were applied and how it was applied. But we are sure there is no standardized approach. Smaller countries like ours were bullied in the name of tax cooperation. In Fiji's case specifically, Mr. Speaker, sir, the blacklisting by EU is largely attributed to our position to maintain the following tax incentives, which have been introduced to support investment, exports and jobs for ordinary Fijians. They want us to remove, number one, the 50% export income tax deduction concession that is provided to Fijian exporters. So if, for example, we are making noodles in Fiji, and if that company is exporting those noodles, say, to Papua New Guinea, Solomon, Vanuatu, or America, wherever it is, to increase our exports, to incentivize our exporters, we actually give them a 50% export income deduction. So it incentivizes them. It creates jobs. Close to 200 Fijian companies, Mr. Speaker, sir, benefit from this, including FMF and various other companies that employs literally hundreds of people. The other taxation regime they want us to take away, we offered a few years ago, Mr. Speaker, sir, a 17% corporate tax rate on the allocation of or reallocation of global or regional headquarters to Fiji. So we said to companies, if you move your regional or global head office to Fiji, because it'll create jobs, they'll invest in the private sector, they'll take up real estate, rent homes, we'll give you a 17% tax deduction. So far, only one company has taken advantage of it, that is ANZ. ANZ has moved its regional head office from Melbourne to Fiji. Second one. The third one they want us to remove, Mr. Speaker, sir, the ICT incentive. Today, we have over 500,000 smartphone users in Fiji. 50% of our population is below the age of 27. We have over 1 million SIM cards that are actually in operation at the moment, more than the number of people we have. So we are technologically very savvy. We believe there is a lot of opportunities and a lot of jobs in this sector. So what we have said, if an ICT company comes and sets up a business and employs more than 50 people, and exports 60% of its services, we'll give you a 13-year tax holiday. Honourable Leader of Opposition knows that they set up tax-free zones in Colombo, post-1987, 13-year tax holidays. It got the garment industry going. We are doing this with the ICT sector. Companies like Mindpearl, RCL, they all are here. 200 jobs, 300 jobs. Some of them run 24/7. Creates jobs. They want us to remove that. Mr. Speaker, sir, the EU is adamant that we remove these tax incentives, but we are a small country. Even though we are a small country, they want to bully us to do that. And we are, of course, a sovereign nation. And we need to protect our national interests and our domestic tax regime. Apart from the removal of tax incentives, Mr. Speaker, sir, EU has also been pushing Fiji to join the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes, sign the OECD Multilateral Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters, and to join the Inclusive Framework on Base Erosion and Profit Sharing, or known as BEPS, which we don't have a problem with and can accede to. We don't have a problem with that. We want to do that. In fact, we had agreed with the UN to pursue these additional conditions. However, after thorough assessment and consultation domestically, because it will have an impact on some of our businesses. However, we resisted removing the tax incentives on those three areas that I earlier on announced, as the impact would be dire for investments, jobs, and would have undermined the Fijian economy. The CEO of Fiji Revenue Customs Services, Mr. Speaker, has also issued a press release in this regard. We are not being treated equally. Mr. Speaker, so there are many countries in the world that have various tax incentives. In fact, we have modeled some of our tax incentives based on these countries, but they have not been blacklisted. I'll give you an example, Mr. Speaker, sir. The lower corporate tax rate for having regional global headquarters relocation was borrowed from Singapore. Singapore has a similar provision. We copied that. But Mr. Speaker, sir, guess what? They offer the same incentive, but they have not been blacklisted. Singapore has not been blacklisted. China has tax incentives for ICT, similar to ours, but EU has not blacklisted China. But they blacklisted us. Mr. Speaker, sir, not only this, there are many countries who are not members of the Global Forum. For example, Nepal, Bhutan, they have not been blacklisted. Not all countries have signed for the OECD Multilateral Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in tax matters, like Thailand, or joined the Inclusive Framework on Base Erosion Profit Sharing, BEPS, for example, Bangladesh. But none of these countries have been blacklisted. EU has been pressurizing us only on these issues. There is no consistency, Mr. Speaker, sir, in the application of these rules. Mr. Speaker, sir, by the EU Code of Conduct Group. Whatever the guidelines they may have, and they're applying, is not applied in a transparent manner or in a uniform manner. We are not sure if there's even a guideline. We have not seen it. They've told us there is one, we have not seen it. The reality is, if these rules that are being imposed on us are applied consistently, many EU countries themselves would be blacklisted, because they are also real tax havens, unlike ours. Oxfam, the NGO, international NGO, has also recently carried out their assessments and agreed with us. But it seems as if EU has targeted the smaller countries. If anyone looks at the list of countries on the blacklist, with the exception of a few, most are small and vulnerable countries. Countries blacklisted include Aruba, Barbados, Belize, Bermuda, Dominica, Fiji, Guam, Marshall Islands, Oman, Samoa, Trinidad and Tobago, UAE, Vanuatu, and territories like American Samoa and US Virgin Islands. Mr. Speaker, sir, the EU, in fact, we believe, has been very inconsiderate of the effect of removing tax incentives in developing countries like Fiji. They're trying to interfere and influence domestic tax policy without really understanding its disruptive implications. The EU did not carry out any impact analysis on the removal of these tax incentives on the Fijian economy, despite our requests. Without an impact assessment, the haphazard removal of standing tax policies would have been hugely irresponsible. We voiced this concern to the EU, noting the economically destructive impact that removing tax incentives would have, including the loss of thousands of Fijian jobs, but to no avail. In addition to the economic impacts, it was also clarified that these incentives do not create any tax avoidance opportunities for European businesses to artificially shift their profits to Fiji to maximize tax. We are not competing with Europe. We don't see a rush of European countries, businesses coming to Fiji because of these three tax incentives. It does not mean European companies will leave overnight to set up in Fiji and directly disadvantage Europe. Fiji has demonstrated that these incentives create real economic activity and has direct impact on Fiji's macroeconomic stability. We have a lot at stake if we remove these incentives. And we have other incentives. Vanuatu set up a new business, 13-year tax holiday. From Nosori all the way to Matawalu village in Rasa, set up a new business, tax incentive. Lomaiviti, Lau, Kandavu, all of these places, because they're economically depressed. We want to drive more businesses there. We want the people from there to stay there. In fact, we want people from the hugely populated areas to go there. Now, if we remove these three, next thing they say, remove this also. They might then say, don't give any more incentives to hotels. because you're competing with Europe. It's ridiculous. Fiji has always, Mr. Speaker, sir, continuously engaged with the EU to discuss the agenda. And these were raised at the high-level Fiji-EU political dialogue, with the EU was encouraged to continue to discuss these issues with Fiji. However, EU has decided otherwise and took this drastic action. But we are glad, because this is largely symbolic, having virtually no impact on the extremely minimal EU trade investment in the country, given that. Although there is no direct impact as a result of blacklisting, it of course paints a negative image. Some people want to capitalize on that, especially at a time when Fiji has introduced tax policy reforms in line with global best standards. The international organizations such as the IMF, that carries out the Article 4 mission in Fiji regularly, has spoken highly of Fiji's tax reforms in their various missions to Fiji, and have used Fiji indeed as a model country in articulated tax reforms in the region. Mr. Speaker, sir, we will, however, continue our dialogue with the EU to get Fiji off the list, but definitely not by compromising the development of Fiji and our sovereignty. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.